Got it.
I'm scared. I'm like, oh, right.
Okay, so those of you who all read different sections yesterday, but let's try to think back to what we read in Bradford yesterday, because we didn't get a chance to put anything on our anchor chart, so we're going to do that now. Awesome. Yes, Jamie? Another one?
Oh, there's two in front and the back
She's high when she does it.
Hey, I have the same room too.
Hey, you said it.
Huh?
What's that?
Looking through them.
Hardcore. I didn't know.
What?
I got called Trevor.
I can do it like
Katie.
What did you say? I didn't understand.
Okay, I need you guys to focus, please.
Hey.
So in Bradford, did he discuss Puritan men?
What?
What evidence do we have from Bradford about what Puritan men were like in that culture? That time period?
Could you give us a hint?
They were helpful. On page 84, I'm going to give you the page number this time since we didn't get to this yesterday. So let's just note that the men were strong and they were good leaders.
Is that the right box?
Does this have to be complete sentences?
Our box is.
Your box is different from mine.
Oh, shoot.
Oh.
Right? Yeah. Yeah, you're right. And that is on page 84 is where we're pulling that from. That way, if you wanted to go back in your textbook and look at it, you know where to find it.
What does it say? Good what?
Leaders.
Does Bradford discuss Puritan women at all?
No.
I don't think
No, not really. So we can just put an X through that one. What happened with the Puritan community? What's a major thing that happened?
They helped each other.
They came together to help the sick.
They came together, right? So they didn't get sick, but they had to come together as a community to help care for everyone. So you could put, the community came together. I know this handwriting up here isn't the greatest for you.
No complete sentences, right?
No, not necessary.
Oh.
These are just sort of quick notes for you. The community was close-knit. And that's from page 85, where we're getting that. What happened, for those of you who read the Indian Relations section, you might be more familiar with, what was one of the major things that happened when the Puritans met with Samoset and Squanto and they spoke with the chief?
They were like really shocked that these would do that.
What did they do? What came out of that meeting?
What is she doing now? Yeah.
Was that ours?
They made a treaty, right? They made a deal. Remember that?
Yeah.
And it listed all the things that they talked about in that section. So as a community, the Puritan community made a peace treaty with the Native American community. And that happened on page 86.
Peace treaty with. what?
86.
86?
Okay, now think back to the very first section, their safe arrival at Cape Cod. Under the Puritan belief section, what could we note? What's the first thing they did when they got to dry land? They thanked God, right? So what does that tell about their community, their culture, their beliefs? They're Christians. They believe that you should thank God for everything. They're faithful, maybe? Faithful to God. So, and that section was on pages 82 and 83. There's something a little more sinister about their beliefs. How did they view killing the Native Americans if necessary? Was that pleasing to God or did it displease God? What did they think?
Wasn't that pleasing?
It was. Remember, because the Puritans believed that anyone who doesn't believe in God the way they do, we're enemies of God, basically. So one of their beliefs was that it pleased God to conquer their enemies.
What page was that?
That was on page 85. It gives some evidence of that. What about nature, the wilderness? Recall that first section again, especially. Their safe arrival at Cape Cod.
I thought you feared it.
Huh?
They feared it.
They feared it, right? They feared nature. They feared the wilderness.
Can I get a drink of water from you? Do you have your water bottle?
What's that? You want to see that?
What?
He referred to the ocean specifically as a sea of troubles. And furious. What did he call the forest? Do you remember when he was looking at the trees?
Oh my god.
He said they were savage, right?
What?
Sea of troubles.
Oh, maybe. Just do it. Just draw the arrow.
Man. This isn't the second
Sea
box.
of
This is the second one.
trouble.
It's because they're switched. What's that thing after trouble?
Furious.
Savage.
Savage. And you might want to, yes. And you might want to make a note on here that they didn't understand how to survive off the land and they had to learn that from the Native Americans. You should know that by now, but you can add that here because he talks about that when Squanto taught them how to farm and live off the land.
Is this like learn nature ocean?
They feared nature.
Oh.
That's an F. Okay. What are you guys doing?
She's looking for her water bottle.
She lost it.
I did not lose it.
I didn't see that.
I couldn't tell you. I was just asking because I was thirsty.
I'm
I
sorry.
remember. Cause I don't have it.
Okay. Well, we gotta keep going. Can I hear this? Are we ready to move on?
No.
Yeah?
Find it
No.
now.
Okay. So.
Good.
Oh my.
Airball.
Okay, so get out your books, please. And we're gonna open them up to page 135. And I'm gonna shorten this some so that we can save time. I get 3 volunteers to help me read. It's just really short. Katie, do we get Nate? Wait, Brooke.
Wait, wasn't that last time?
Yeah.
Last time.
135, 135.
Yeah, I got one. Everyone else is like, I don't want to read.
We're just looking at,
You have that quiet.
guys,
135. What'd you say?
Can you not read that?
I can't hear you.
I
I was writing that.
got one.
Oh. I thought you said while I was paying attention.
waiting for everyone to pay attention.
Oh, did you find it?
She found it.
Oh. I wonder who took it.
Okay. Alright, so we're gonna be adding this to our anchor charts. Under your building background section on your anchor charts, it says between heaven and hell, pages 134 and 135. That's what we're on right now. So these three key beliefs that we're about to read are very important. They may not fit in the Puritan belief section on your building background, so you may want to sort of draw an arrow and list them out long ways on the bottom of your paper. Like bullet points or something.
Could this go for man and woman? Or is that?
This is their belief. Key
Where is
belief.
it going here?
This will.
Where?
Building background.
Nate, would you please read the first one? Starting with key belief. You want to keep it all together so you don't lose it. If you want to.
Human being.
You just make sure you get it down because we're going to move on pretty quick.
You said human being?
Starting at towards the end, on page 135, the very bottom.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, I got you now.
Yeah.
Everything we did yesterday.
Yeah.
Okay. Human beings are inherently evil and so must struggle to overcome their sinful nature. This belief of original sin was one of the first things a Puritan child learned. In Adam's fall / we sinned all is the rhyme that teaches the letter A in the New England Primer. Primer.
Okay, so the first key belief held by all Puritans, these beliefs are going to inform their literature and their thinking from here on out. So it's important that we get them in our brains and remember them. The first one is that all human beings, if you're human, you're evil. That's it. And everyone has a sinful nature. You've got to struggle to overcome that through the grace of God. So we just write all human beings.
Oh, I cannot.
Yeah.
If you're human, you're evil.
What is this?
135.
What human equals evil.
And this will be, like, when we write, like, this will be what goes in our boxes, right?
Puritan beliefs.
Number 2.
Personal salvation depends solely on the grace of God, not on individual effort. Puritans believed in predestination, the doctrine that only those people who are elected by God are saved and go to heaven. The only way an individual could know that he or she was saved was by directly experiencing God's grace in a religious conversion. Is that like a seizure?
Yeah.
But I see what she meant though, like, so they know that, so she knows that they were gifted by God.
I just didn't know if it was like a seizure.
Are you thinking of like some Pentecostal churches have certain
Well, no, just like
experiences?
the word like conversion.
You mean like
Conversion is like when they convert to Christianity. They convert to believing Christ the way that they viewed the Bible.
That's not a seizure.
No, it's a spiritual experience. It's something that happens between an individual and God. It's a conversion experience. So this is something that Edwards is going to talk about. We're going to read his sermon next. This is what he's talking about. That personal salvation is dependent only on God. There's nothing that you can do to save yourself. It's up to God.
Would this be also in your beliefs?
All three of these are going to be.
Wait, what did you say?
Personal salvation depends solely on the grace of God. It's basically these italicized portions. These are going to be the 3 points. And like I said, they may not fit in your little box, so if you want to write them at the bottom of your page, that might be easier.
You have to write the
So
whole.
that you can.
You want us to write the page number?
You can if you want, because the page number says it.
You haven't read.
Okay. Brooke, number 3, please.
The Bible is the supreme authority on earth. Puritans argued that the Bible was the sole guide, not only in governing the moral and spiritual life, but also in governing the church and society as a whole. One effect of this belief was to make Puritan churches more democratic or organized around their congregations rather than around ruling bishops. On the other hand, it led the Puritans to be more repressive in their political systems and more intolerant of others. For example, they used the Bible to justify their occupation of the land and their use of force against Native Americans. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. Romans 13:2. In short, the Puritans saw themselves as God's chosen people, like the children of Israel in the Old Testament.
So this ties directly to what we wrote down just now under Bradford, that it pleased God to vanquish your enemies. So the Puritans believed that the Bible is the supreme authority for every matter on this earth. If you needed to know something, you went to the Bible. That's it. You didn't look anywhere else. So that's all three. Got them? Ready to move on? Okay. So we're going to watch a short video. And there's a lot of people gone today for the field trip, so take these notes with the intention that they're going to help someone who's gone as we watch these videos. We're going to watch two, and they're brief. But the first one is going to be about the difference between Pilgrims and Puritans, because there are subtle differences that are important to note.
So we need to take notes on the video.
Yes, that's what we're doing right now.
Will we shut our voice?
No.
So, notes here?
Yeah, the Mexican.
Okay, guys, while we're watching this, I want you to please be quiet and pay attention, okay?
Why?
Yeah.
Take good notes. And I'll give you a hint. Listen to the guy with the hat. He knows what's going on.
What's up?
He knows what's up. The guy with the hat.
I'm Carrie Peterson from Mrs. Fix at Home Repair. I have my whole shop in the Transit Connect. You have to be able to get from job to job to job quickly. That's the only way to make money. This makes all the difference in the world.
I think she had Rosie the River inside of her car.
The Puritans came from Europe to escape persecution. It's the story of how religion carved our first states.
In the founding of the American colonies, religion was absolutely critical. It was one of the things that drove people out of England across the wide, cold ocean to North America.
Back then, Massachusetts looked like this. It stretched clear across New England. Its story begins with the Pilgrims. Or was it the Puritans? I
How many
can
notes
never
do you
keep
have?
those two straight.
The difference
3, 5.
between a
We're gonna watch two
pilgrim
videos.
and a Puritan is what?
They're both coming from England to get away from the Church of England. They're coming here for religious freedoms.
The Pilgrims were the people, the Puritans were how they lived,
Okay.
right?
Well,
They're both Protestants. Pilgrims want to be known as separatists. We are separating from the church. Puritans want to purify it, but then make it a better church.
I know there was a big rock involved. I think the rock is in a transition.
So how did Massachusetts break into pieces? 1620, the Pilgrims land at Plymouth Rock. 9 years later, the Puritans arrive at Salem. The two groups merge and spread across New England. But it's not long before they start bickering. Their faith fractures, and the cracks are what carve today's state lines.
So one thing we can see in looking at these boundaries in New England is that religious convictions played a very strong role in where they're actually located.
One rebel, Roger Williams, leads his followers to form an even purer settlement of Puritans.
He was so Puritan, he was too Puritan for the Puritans in Massachusetts, and they kicked him out. He came up with this conclusion that people should be able to practice whatever religion.
This new group settles on an island that would give the future state its name, Rhode Island. So this is where true religious freedom in America was first established. The bickering Puritans end up splitting into 4 colonies. But Massachusetts holds on to Maine until 1820. And that's how religion shaped the states of New England.
So now, I'm going to introduce Jonathan Edwards to you. This is whose sermon we're going to be reading today. We're not going to watch all of it, but some. But take some notes about his life and some of the things that he's done.
In 18th century America, life was changing. The British colonies of Massachusetts and Connecticut were growing in population as more and more British moved from England to America. And with more people came more luxuries and an easier life than the previous 100 years had brought. In the midst of this changing America, Jonathan Edwards became known as one of the great philosophers and ministers of the nascent colonies, and one of the founders of the religious revival movement of the mid-1700s known as the Great Awakening. Edwards was born in Connecticut in 1703, the only son of a preacher and the daughter of a preacher. Edwards was valedictorian of his class at Yale and went on to seminary to become a preacher himself. In the 1720s and early 1730s, Edwards became concerned that the people of the colonies had lost their focus on God. Instead, he thought they were being distracted by the worldly goods that had become more plentiful as new colonists and traders flowed into Massachusetts and Connecticut with more regularity. He became a founding and central figure in a new religious revival known as the Great Awakening, during which time he delivered his most famous sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God.
Oh, it's cut off a little early. Sinners in the hands of an angry God, that's what she said. That's what we're about to read. So that's all we're going to watch on Edwards. I'm going to turn on the lights, don't be sad. So when you finish up your notes, make sure that your names are on your little papers and pass them over.
What was the story called?
Sinners in the hands of an angry God. There you go. And if you want to go ahead and turn your books to page 153, that's where we'll be reading next.
Angry God?
Angry God.
Angry God. Wait, you said 153?
Yes, ma'am. F-E-R-N-O-N. We'll do it together. There you go.
You should.
Do I have everyone's notes? No. Do I have everyone's notes now?
What page?
153.
They're trying to touch this one.
Thank you.
Sam, have you turned yours in?
Okay, so when we took our ACT diagnostic, rhetorical skills was something that a lot of us was one of our weakest areas for across the board for everyone, and that's probably because you haven't been taught very much of it yet. So this is just sort of a preview, and a rhetorical skill is something that Edwards uses in his sermon, and it's called emotional appeal. He's appealing to the emotions of his audience to win an argument or to persuade them. This is persuasive writing. He wants to persuade them to see his point of view and to do something that he wants them to do. It's not the most logical use of appeal, but it is effective in that it's manipulative because it appeals to the emotions audience. And he's really good at using imagery to really drive his points home as far as his appeals go. And you'll see what I'm talking about in just a second with that. So on your sheet, you have, may I borrow this, Dan? Absolutely. At the top, there are 3 different kinds of appeals that he uses, identified for you at the top. So we're looking for fear, pity, and guilt. And there's a 4th one, and I'll point it out to you as we get there. So what you're going to do as we read is you're going to find a piece of textual evidence and quote it. And then you're going to say which emotion it appeals to, and explain why. How is it effective? How is it an effective use of emotional appeal? And I'll give you some, so we'll go through this together, and then we'll sort of recap. So let me get to the right page first. There we go. Will everyone be able to see if I turn the light off, the back light? Yeah. Yeah.
We can't say.
Is that okay? Can you see okay to read? Okay, so we're going to follow along with this. We're going to listen to it on audio. Pay attention as we read.
From Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God by Jonathan Edwards. We find it easy to tread on and crush a worm that we see crawling on the earth. So it is easy for us to cut or singe a slender thread that anything hangs by. Thus easy is it for God, when he pleases, to cast his enemies down to hell. They are now the objects of that very same anger and wrath of God that is expressed in the torments of hell. And the reason why they do not go down to hell at each moment is not because God, in whose power they are, is not then very angry with them, as angry as he is with many miserable creatures now tormented in hell, who there feel and bear the fierceness of his wrath. Yea, God is a great deal more angry with great numbers that are now on earth, yea, doubtless, with many that are now in this congregation, who it may be are at ease, than he is with many of those who are now in the flames of hell. So that it is not because God is unmindful of their wickedness, and does not resent it, that he does not let loose his hand and cut them off. God is not altogether such an one as themselves, though they may imagine him to be so. The wrath of God burns against them, their damnation does not slumber. The pit is prepared, the fire is made ready, the furnace is now hot, ready to receive them. The flames do now rage and glow. The glittering sword is whet and held over them, and the pit hath opened its mouth under them.
Let's talk about that last passage. He is using some really strong imagery. How would a Puritan member of the audience feel hearing that? Scared, right? So that is one of his appeals to fear. Oh, I didn't write that one down. That's the next one. So any of those images, you don't have to quote the entire thing, but any of those images are something that would inspire fear in his audience. What's the reason the Puritans would feel afraid? Afraid of going to hell. So he's saying that their damnation does not slumber. So that means that there's no way they're going to get out of it. It doesn't sleep. It's there waiting for them all the time if they're not converted. The pit is prepared, the fire is made ready, the furnace is now hot, ready to receive them. That's very menacing, isn't it? The thought of being put into a furnace. The glittering sword is wet. What is wet? Sharp. So a sharp sword in front of you is sort of a menacing image, right? Not very good. Makes you feel a little nervous. A lot nervous. So the images get stronger, and we'll continue to pause and talk about some of them as we go. So that was the first one. That's kind of what we're looking for in this.
Oh, we can write that down.
You can. Yes. That is an appeal to fear. There are lots of appeals to fear.
Why is it the fear?
I'm sorry?
You said to explain why it's fear.
Because they're
Because
afraid
it-
of going to hell. How are those images effective in making someone feel fearful? Think about what Edwards is saying and how the Puritans would receive those words and process them.
Unconverted men walk over the pit of hell on a rotten covering, and there are innumerable places in this covering so weak that they will not bear their weight, and these places are not seen. The arrows of death fly unseen at noonday. The sharpest sight cannot discern them. God has so many different unsearchable ways of taking wicked men out of the world and sending them to hell, that there is nothing to make it appear that God had need to be at the expense of a miracle, or go out of the ordinary course of his providence to destroy any wicked man at any moment.
Look for fear in this
So
next
that,
part.
thus it is that natural men are held in the hand of God over the pit of hell. They have deserved the fiery pit, and are already sentenced to it. And God is dreadfully provoked. His anger is as great towards them as to those that are actually suffering the executions of the fierceness of his wrath in hell.
So, what about that is an appeal to fear,
They held in the hand of God over the pit.
right? So you can imagine that
And that they deserve
being in God's giant hand, and you're over this fiery pit. At any moment, he could just let you fall right into it. God has all the control over all the people. It's a really scary image if you really think about it. So that's what the Puritans, they were hanging on his every word. So far he's said fear, fear. Let's see what else he has to say as we keep going along.
And they have done nothing in the least to appease or abate that anger. Neither is God in the least bound by any promise to hold them up one moment. The devil is waiting for them. Hell is gaping for them. The flames gather and flash about them, and would fain lay hold on them and swallow them up. The fire pent up in their own hearts is struggling to break out, and they have no interest in any mediator. There are no means within reach that can be any security to them. In short, they have no refuge, nothing to take hold of.
So what kind of appeal is that? What's refuge? It's like a safe place, right? So they don't have a safe place. They don't have anything to grab a hold of. They're just perpetually falling. How would someone feel about someone in that situation? Would you feel fear, pity, or guilt? Pity, right? You would pity them because they're falling and they have no way to take a hold of anything. So in this instance, Edwards is using an appeal to pity. He's creating a feeling of helplessness and a certainty that some of them are going to hell if they haven't been converted. And he's been very descriptive thus far about what hell is like. It's not a fun place.
The bow of God's wrath is bent, and the arrow made ready on the string. And justice bends the arrow at your heart, and strains the bow. And it is nothing but the mere pleasure of God, and that of an angry God, without any promise or obligation at all, that keeps the arrow one moment from being made drunk with your blood.
That sounds like fear.
Thus, all you that never passed under a great change of heart, by the mighty power of the Spirit of God upon your souls, all you that were never born again, and made new creatures, and raised from being dead in sin, to a state of new and before altogether unexperienced light and life, are in the hands of an angry God. However you may have reformed your life in many things, and may have had religious affections, and may keep up a form of religion in your families and closets, and in the house of God, it is nothing but his mere pleasure that keeps you from being this moment swallowed up in everlasting destruction.
So what is Edward saying to his congregation right now? Did you guys catch that? So he's saying that, so he's been talking about the unconverted thus far, right? Having the danger of being placed in hell. Well, now he's talking to, he says, all you that were never born again. Okay, so, however, you may have reformed your life in many things and may have had religious affections. That means that experience. And you may keep a form of religion in your families and closets and in the house of God. But it is nothing but his mere pleasure that keeps you from being this moment swallowed up in everlasting destruction. So he's even putting the fear into people that have made the conversion. He's saying, you guys aren't completely safe yet. Even, so they're sitting in church, and he says at any moment, God could open up the floor and swallow you up, and you could just fall right into hell. That's a scary thing. Imagine being a Puritan and listening to this. He's a very iconic figure in their culture. He's sort of like Elvis. So he was very well known and very sought after. There would have been a huge congregation listening to him. Let's keep going. Maybe.
The God that holds you over the pit of hell, much as one holds a spider or some loathsome insect over the fire, abhors you, and is dreadfully provoked. His wrath towards you burns like fire. He looks upon you as worthy of nothing else but to be cast into the fire. He is of purer eyes than to bear to have you in his sight. You are 10,000 times more abominable in his eyes than the most hateful, venomous serpent is in ours.
So what kind of God is Edwards describing? An angry God. Is he a loving God? Does he love his people? From Edwards' point of view? No, it sounds like he kind of hates everyone, right? He says that they're like a loathsome insect, and he's dangling them over the flame. Imagine if someone told you that they thought of you like a bug. That's really demeaning, right? It's awful. He says that he hates them, that God hates them more than a venomous snake. And people usually aren't that fond of venomous snakes, right? So those are really strong words and really strong images that would really connect with those people.
You have offended him infinitely more than ever a stubborn rebel did his prince, and yet it is nothing but his hand that holds you from falling into the fire every moment. It is to be ascribed to nothing else that you did not go to hell the last night, that you was suffered to awake again in this world after you closed your eyes to sleep. And there is no other reason to be given why you have not dropped into hell since you arose in the morning, but that God's hand has held you up. There is no other reason to be given why you have not gone to hell since you have sat here in the house of God, provoking his pure eyes by your sinful, wicked manner of attending his solemn worship. Yea, there is nothing else that is to be given as a reason why you do not this very moment drop down into hell. O sinner, consider the fearful danger you are in. It is a great furnace of wrath, a wide and bottomless pit full of the fire of wrath, that you are held over in the hand of that God, whose wrath is provoked and incensed as much against you as against many of the damned in hell. You hang by a slender thread, with the flames of divine wrath flashing about it, and ready every moment to singe it and burn it asunder. And you have no interest in any mediator, and nothing to lay hold of to save yourself, nothing to keep off the flames of wrath, nothing of your own, nothing that you have ever done, nothing that you can do to induce God to spare you one moment. It is everlasting wrath. It would be dreadful to suffer this fierceness and wrath of Almighty God one moment, but you must suffer it to all eternity. There will be no end to this exquisite, horrible misery.
What kind of appeal is that? Fear again, right? So here's the last example that I'll give you, and then you guys are on your own if you haven't finished yet. Be looking for these. So he's appealing to their fear by creating anxiety and unease, that there will be no end to their misery. That would make me feel a little nervous to know that I could be subject to unending misery. Doesn't sound great. I'm gonna keep going, but keep listening. I'll try to warn you when one's coming up. Listen for pity. That'll be the next one coming.
When you look forward, you shall see a long forever, a boundless duration before you, which will swallow up your thoughts and amaze your soul. And you will absolutely despair of ever having any deliverance, any end, any mitigation, any rest at all. You will know certainly that you must wear out long ages, millions of ages, in wrestling and conflicting with this almighty, merciless vengeance. And then when you have so done, when so many ages have actually been spent by you in this manner, you will know that all is but a point to what remains, so that your punishment will indeed be infinite. Oh, who can express what the state of a soul in such circumstances is? All that we can possibly say about it gives but a very feeble, faint representation of it. It is inexpressible and inconceivable, for who knows the power of God's anger? How dreadful is the state of those that are daily and hourly in the danger of this great wrath and infinite misery. But this is the dismal case of every soul in this congregation that has not been born again, however moral and strict, sober and religious they may otherwise be. And now you have an extraordinary opportunity, a day wherein Christ has thrown the door of mercy wide open and stands in the door calling and crying with a loud voice to poor sinners. A day wherein many are flocking to him and pressing into the kingdom of God. Many are daily coming from the east, west, north, and south. Many that were very lately in the same miserable condition that you are in.
What did Edwards just do? To what did he appeal?
Right?
It was something different. He said they had an opportunity, right? So far he's given them fear, fear, pity. Fear, fear, fear. Basically, he's really made them feel anxious, and they're worked up into this state. And then he gives them a glimmer of hope, one little shred. And he says, but wait, you have an opportunity. They have a way out, right? What was their way out? What was he saying they could escape? How could they escape? Through Christ.
Yeah, same thing.
Ish.
Ish.
Not to them, I guess. So that is beginning at and, that giant and on your page 156. There is an appeal to hope in that, and if you wanted to write that down, that would be something interesting other than pity, guilt, and fear. But he doesn't end on a high note, unfortunately. He appeals to guilt at the end, so listen to that if you haven't filled out your charts completely.
Are now in a happy state, with their hearts filled with love to him who has loved them, and washed them from their sins in his own blood, and rejoicing in hope of the glory of God. How awful is it to be left behind at such a day?
Wow.
To see so many others feasting, while you are pining and perishing.
There's our guilt,
To
right?
see so many rejoicing and singing for joy of heart, while you have cause to mourn for sorrow of heart, and howl for vexation of spirit. How can you rest one moment in such a condition? Therefore, let every one that is out of Christ now awake and fly from the wrath to come.
So do you understand how Edwards' use of imagery and emotional appeal would have been very effective to a Puritan audience? You see how they would have been terrified and been like, oh, how can we save ourselves? And then he solidifies that with making them feel guilty. Did you guys see that? So he was a very masterful user of rhetoric in that. So I'm going to explain the next portion of the assignment to you, and there isn't much time in class, but don't worry, these won't be due until Monday. Still want you to do a good job. Keep that. You might want that for this. Okay, So found poetry is using the author's words in a new way to create an idea, to communicate an idea. So just keep it. Keep a hold of everything. Let me explain this and then we'll get to that. So on the board I have some examples online. These were just pulled offline of found poetry. So what you're going to be doing is you're going to be looking for, this is an excerpt of the excerpt that we just read. You're going to be looking for words or phrases that can communicate one of the emotional appeals that we have just looked at. That's why you want to keep your notes. This very last paragraph appeals to hope. So if you want to make your whole poem about hope, you would look to this last paragraph and you would make your visual up here or just all around the paper. And like, these are student examples from Willard when I taught there briefly. So here's some of the work that they have done. You don't have to completely be super artistic. If you are, do it. I'm not. But they just blacked out portions of it and left out the words they wanted to be their poem. It needs to communicate one of the appeals that we have discussed.
Oh.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You're using the author's words, and it's good to try to make it somehow visually appealing. I want you to use color. There's a lot of appeals to fear, so you might have a lot of hellfire, or dangling spiders, or flying bows and arrows, or blood. Or you might have a door flung open with heavenly light, and Christ waiting, it's whatever appeal you want to focus on. There's all kinds of opportunities to utilize the imagery that Edwards communicated in here. So, do you guys understand what to do? Okay. There are analysis questions on the back of this. Ignore them. I'm not assigning them. Okay? Yay.